Kapijana Balaba Girivarari Kapijana Balaba Girivarari Yasaranandana Prajajana Ranjana Yasaranandana Prajajana Ranjana Yamuna Chira Vanachari Yamuna Chira Vanachari Jaya Radha Madhava Kanga Bihari Jaya Radha Madhava Kanga Bihari Kapijana Balaba Girivarari Kapijana Balaba Girivarari Yasaranandana Bhajajana Ranjana Yasaranandana Bhajajana Ranjana Yamuna Chira Vanachari Yamuna Chira Vanachari Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare 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 Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare Shri Radha Madhava Ki Jai. Shri Radha Nila Madhava Ki Jai. Samaveda Bhaktivinoda Ki. Grantaraj Srimad Bhagavatam Ki Jai. So we're reading from the 11th canto today. I can look up the verse. Know which verse it is? Oh, it's on my phone. It's okay, sorry. 11:7. 11:7. 11.7. Text 57 till the end of the chapter. A lot of verses here. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. So, we'll do the Sanskrit for one of the verses at least. There don't seem to be any purports. There's one. Okay, so we'll do the Sanskrit to the verse that has the purport, which is verse number 68. But first of all, I'll do the previous verses just by myself, and I'll read the translation. This is text number 57. This chapter is entitled Lord Krishna Instructs Uddhava. Kapoti pratamam gabam grinanti kala agate andani shushuve nide swapatyu sanido sati. Translation. Then the female pigeon experienced her first pregnancy. When the time arrived, the chaste lady delivered a number of eggs within the nest in the presence of her husband. So this is about a couple of pigeons who are very attached to each other and their life and how they suffered because they got caught by the hunter. So they're very attached. She got pregnant. This is an allegory, obviously, which Krishna is using to instruct Uddhava. Okay, text number 58. Teshu kale vyajayanta rachita vayavahare shakti bedevi bhavyabi komalanga tanuruha. Translation. When the time was ripe, baby pigeons with tender limbs and feathers created by the inconceivable potencies of the Lord were born from those eggs. Prajapupu shatu prito dampati putra vatsalo shrinvanto kujitam tasam nivrito kalabasitai. The two pigeons became most affectionate to their children and took great pleasure in listening to their awkward chirping, which sounded very sweet to the parents. Thus, with love, they began to raise the little birds who were born of them. Text number 60. Tasam patatrai suspashai kujitai mukta chastitai prachudgamar adinanam pitara mudam apatu. The parent birds became very joyful by observing the soft wings of their children, their chirping, their lovely innocent movements around the nest, and their attempts to jump and fly. Seeing their children happy, the parents were also happy. Text number 61. Sneha nubada hridayav anyanyam vishnumaya vimohito dinadiyo Shishan pupushatu praja. Their hearts bound to each other by affection, the foolish birds, completely bewildered by the illusory energy of Lord Vishnu, continued to take care of the young offspring who had been born to them. Text 62. Ekada jagmatustasam anatam ta kutumbino parita kanane tasmin atino Cheratushchiram. One day the two heads of the family went out to find food for the children. Being very anxious to feed their offspring properly, they wandered all over the forest for a long time. Text 63. Trishtra tan lubdaka kaschid yadrichato vanechara jagrihe jalam atatya charata swalayantike. At that time, a certain hunter who happened to be wandering through the forest saw the young pigeons moving about near the nest. Spreading out his net, he captured them all. Text 64. Kapatascha kapatotivcha praja poshe sadot sukau gato poshanam adaya swanidam upajagmatu. The pigeon and his wife were always anxious for the maintenance of their children, and they were wandering in the forest for that purpose. Having obtained proper food, they now returned to their nest. Text 65. Kapoti swatmajan viksha balakan jalasamritan tanabhyadavat kroshanti kroshato brishatukita. When the lady pigeon caught sight of her own children trapped within the hunter's net, she was overwhelmed with anguish, and crying out, she rushed towards them as they cried out to her in return. Text 66. Sasakrit sneha gunita dina chittaja mayaya swayam cha bhajata shicha badan pashyan cha pashmiti. The lady pigeon had always allowed herself to be bound by the ropes of intense material affection, and thus her mind was overwhelmed by anguish. Being in the grip of the illusory energy of the Lord, she completely forgot herself, and rushing forward to her helpless children, she was immediately bound in the hunter's net. Text 67. Kapata swatmajan badan atmano pyadikan priyan Paryam chatma samam dino vilalapati dukita. Seeing his own children, who were more dear to him than life itself, fatally bound in the hunter's net, along with his dearmost wife, whom he considered equal to him in every way to himself, the poor male pigeon began to lament wretchedly. Text 68. Aho me pashyata payam alpa punyasya durmate Atri pitasya kritatasya grihastraiva gikohata. Oh, this is one we're doing together. Okay, repeat after me. Aho me pashyata payam alpa punyasya durmate atriptasya kritatasya grihastraiva gikohata. Aho me pasyata payam alpa punyasya durmate achitasya kritatasya grihastraiva gikohata. Somebody else? Aho, alas, me, my, Pashita, chasi, apayam, the destruction, alpapunyasya, of him whose pious credit has been insufficient. Durmate, unintelligent. Achiptasya, unsatisfied. Akrita artasya, of him who has not fulfilled the purpose of his life. Griha, the family life. Chaivagika, comprising the three aims of civilized existence: religiosity, economic development, and sense gratification. Hata, ruined. Translation: the male pigeon said, "Alas, just see how I am now destroyed. I am obviously a great fool, for I did not properly execute pious activities. I could not satisfy myself, nor could I fulfill the purpose of life. My dear family, which was the basis of my religiosity, economic development, and sense gratification, is now hopelessly ruined." Purport by the disciples of Srila Prabhupada. Srila Sridhar Swami explains that the word apchiptasya indicates that the pigeon was not satisfied with the sense gratification he had achieved. Although he was completely attached to his wife, children, and nest, he could not sufficiently enjoy them, since there is ultimately no satisfaction in such things. Akrita artasya indicates that his hopes and dreams for future expansion of his sense gratification were now also ruined. People commonly refer to their home, sweet home, as their nest, and money put aside for future sense gratification is called a nest egg. Therefore, all of the lovebirds of the material world should clearly note how their so-called wife, children, and fortune will all be dragged away in the hunter's net. In other words, death will finish everything. So I'm supposed to go till text 74, so I'll just read the rest myself. Anurupanukulacha yasya me pati devata shunye grihe mam santajya putrai swarayati sadbuhi. My wife and I were an ideal match. She always faithfully obeyed me, and in fact accepted me as her worshipable deity. But now, seeing her children lost and her home empty, she has left me behind and gone to heaven with our saintly children. Soham sunye grihe dino mrita dara mrita praja chiji vishe kimartamba viduro dukkha jivita. Now I am a wretched person living in an empty home. My wife is dead, my children are dead. Why should I possibly want to live? My heart is so pained by separation from my family that life itself has become simply suffering. Text 71. Tam stataiva vritan shigbir mritu grastan vicheshtataha sayam cha kripana shikshu pashanapya hudo patat. As the father pigeon wretchedly stared at his poor children trapped in the net and on the verge of death, pathetically struggling to free themselves, his mind went blank, and thus he himself fell into the hunter's net. Text 72. Tam ladva lubataka krura kapotam griha medinam kapotakan kapitim cha siddhata prayayo griham. The cruel hunter, having fulfilled his desire by capturing the head pigeon, his wife, and all their children, set off for his own home. Evan kuntum bhyavashantatma dvandva patatrivat pushnan kutumbam kripana shanubandha vasidati. In this way, one who is too attached to family life becomes disturbed at heart. Like the pigeon, he tries to find pleasure in mundane sex attraction. Busily engaged in maintaining his own family, the miserly person is fated to suffer greatly along with all his family members. The final verse. Ya prapya manasam lokam mukti dwaram apavritam griheshu kagavachaktas tam aruta chutam vidhu. The doors of liberation are open wide to one who has achieved human life. But if a human being simply devotes himself to family life, like the foolish bird in this story, then he is to be considered as one who has climbed to a high place only to trip and fall down. Om Jnanatam Mandasya Gnanañanan Shlakaya Chakshuram Manatam Yena Tasmai Shri Gurave Namaha Shri Chaitanya Manobhastam Stapatam Yena Bhutale Swam Rupa Kadamayam Dadati Swapadantikam. So, this is, everything in the Bhagavatam is very important, especially when it's spoken by Krishna himself. So Krishna's explaining the dangers of becoming too attached in family life. This is a constant theme in the Bhagavatam, actually. There are many places where this is repeated again and again. Kapila Dev himself, he talks about it at great length, practically a whole chapter talking about it. Then there's the story of Puranjan in the 4th canto. Talks about how King Puranjan became a woman in the next life because he thought of his wife at the time of death. And then also Rishabdev talks about it. He says, what's it? Pumsa Srimatanam Bevame Taj Tayomitu Griha Tom Matu Griha Atogriha Shakra Sutaptada Vitaya Janasamaho Yamahamameti. That the basic principle of material life, or the attraction between male and female, is the basic principle of material life. On the basis of this misconception, which ties together the heart of the male and the female, one thinks in terms of one's wife, one's home, one's family, one's land, etc. So the sex attraction is a basic principle of material life. And then in very soon after that, Rishabdev said, he says, Tapo divyam putrikayena sattvam. He said, Nayam deho deha bhajani loke kastan kamane vidbhujamye tapo divyam putrikayena sattvam sujanti tasma. Well, how's it go? Sujanti and Brahma Sukyam. So he says that this human life is meant for austerity. And it's not meant for imitating the animals. It's meant for actually performing austerity by which the happiness of the soul is experienced. So the Hare Krishna movement has been through different phases, and one of the problems we had in the beginning was that when people heard these kind of instructions in the, there's one verse also in the 5th canto, chapter 18, where the residents of Jambudvip, they're praying, they say, may we never become attracted to this family life, which is like a prison. It's a constant theme. And in the beginning of Iskcon, this side of the philosophy was sort of exaggerated quite extensively. And therefore, there was a lot of artificial renunciation. And that was a problem because, a lot of the second generation, they maybe weren't really taken care of as well. The women were mistreated, and, we had problems like that. So it's quite complicated how to arrange society so that you have the correct balance between being attached enough to be responsible for your family and to bring them up affectionately, and being too detached so that, there's future repercussions with your children and with your wife. So it's a fine balance, and it requires intelligence. One of the things that Prabhupada complained about, actually, was when he was in India, before he came to America, he was trying to preach, and he was trying to get some manpower, some help to start the Krishna consciousness movement. And so he asked different people if they could donate their son. Can you donate your son so that he can join me and be a preacher? And Prabhupada, he got very discouraged because no one would donate their son. So then he came to America, and he actually said that it was good in a way that in America people are not so attached to their families. That, people here, they want to leave their family as soon as possible, get away, go to school, go to college, don't want to be bothered with their parents. But at the same time, this is not ideal either. But, Prabhupada, he knew how to utilize different circumstances for the sake of spreading Krishna consciousness. So, it helped spread the mission. But it's not, what we're really aiming for in the long term. We're aiming for people to naturally become detached. And that is achieved by practicing Krishna consciousness properly. So, Prabhupada said over and over again that the Grihastha ashram is an ashram. It's an ashram for making spiritual advancement. So, the wife and the husband, they have to be very serious about making advancement and following all the regulative principles, and try to be strict devotees, so that naturally they will become detached. I think Prabhupada, maybe he wasn't aware of how degraded Western people were, but what he suggested was that, people get married, they build a small hut in West Virginia, in New Vrindavan, 12 by 12, and they have one child, and then the husband goes off and takes sannyas, and then the son looks after the mother. So it doesn't quite go like that. We've seen that, people that are raised in the West, or who live in the West, or Indian people that come to the West, they tend to have more desire for a nice house. I've seen some of the houses around here, they're pretty nice. So, but actually, the instruction given by Rishabdev is also, he explains, Yevame she krita suridata janeshu dehambra vatikeshu. This is an important verse in the 5th canto. He says that those who are householders should not be attached to their homes. They should not endeavor to make more money than what is required to keep the body and soul together. They should not be attached to their homes or their wives or their children. It's quite a high standard, Rishabdev, but that's what it says. So, the whole idea is to become detached. And this is only possible by having a very rigorous and serious spiritual life. So, Prabhupada, he wanted Grihasthas to keep following the regular program, because back in the day, many of the devotees were grihastas. We saw that many people took sannyas, but a lot of them weren't fit for sannyas. So you probably know the story as well as I do, that he gave sannyas to many young, mainly American men, and pretty soon, they fell by the wayside. So there has to be a balance, and so the Grihastha ashram is a very important ashram. And all the samskaras for bringing children into the world are very important. And I know that in Iskcon nowadays, most parents, they follow the samskaras. And it's very important because we want to actually have good progeny. We see that there are some exceptions, but the very best devotees, their parents are devotees. So, we want to actually create offspring and progeny that will push on Krishna consciousness, which means that the children have to be conceived properly, they have to be raised properly, and then, they have to be encouraged to become preachers or to help spread Krishna consciousness. And then, having children is a real gift, it's a real service to the world, having good children. So we have to see that, this, a lot of times, in Western countries, the women, and, it's in our movement, the women want freedom. It's okay, let them be gurus, okay. But actually, the future of the world depends on women, especially, being good mothers. Without that, the world would become more degraded. So, being a woman and being a mother is obviously, you are raising the future of the world, because those children, they are the future of the world. And if children, if they're not stable, then you won't have a stable society. So if you want to have a stable society, you have to have stable children, you have to have stable parents, and then, like Srila Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati, he said, if I could have 100 Krishna-conscious children, that would be great. So his father, obviously, Srila Bhaktivinoda Thakur, he had such a great son. And, Srila Prabhupada's father was a devotee, and he prayed to have a pure devotee. And, he was always asking the sadhus to give their blessings that his, son would be a great devotee of Radharani. So it's a great opportunity, because most people are going to get married. We can, it's very rare that men will not ultimately get married. And so, if they can avoid it, that's great. We have Radha Krishna Prabhu, he's very fortunate. But most people are going to have to get married. And so, we should enter into it with the right mentality that this is a very important ashram. Shri Shri Radha Nilamadhava Ki Jai. So, but at the same time, we want to come out of it the other side. And even if you're an attached grihastha, if you practice Krishna consciousness, you can still come out the other side. Because the Bhagavatam has many different features and facets. And we've got the whole story of Yayati. You know the story of Yayati? You don't know Yayati? Anyway, Yayati, he was, actually his son was Yadu. And Krishna was born in the Yadu dynasty. So even though, he had some blemishes on his character, still, some or other, Krishna was born in the dynasty of which he was the father. But the story with him is that, he was very attached to sex life. And, but he was cursed to become old because he was unfaithful to his wife, basically. So he was cursed to become old by Sukracharya. He became old, and then he was so attached to the idea of enjoying with his wife, who was young and beautiful, that he had no qualms about asking his children if they could give him their youth, which is pretty selfish. But anyway, so he asked his sons, and Yadu, his eldest son, he said, no, it wouldn't be religious if I gave you my youth, because I want to fulfill my desires too and go through the different ashrams and eventually, come out the other side as a renounced person. So I'm not going to give you my youth. So I think he had 4 sons, so he asked all of them. The final one, Puru, he was the best one. And he voluntarily offered to give his youth to his father, Yayati, in exchange for his old age. And so, Yayati became young again, and his wife was called Devayani, so they enjoyed heavenly pleasures. But at the end, after thousands of years, he said, I've been doing this for a long time, and I'm still not satisfied. So then he decided to give it all up. So he preached to his wife. There's an allegorical story, preached to his wife. And then he gave it up, and he became very detached. So even if you have material desires, as we know, there's a famous verse, Akama Savakama Va Moksha Kama Daradi Tivrena Bhakti Yogina Yajita Purusham Param, that whether one is full of material desires or whether one is desireless, still one should worship Krishna because he knows how to fulfill your material desires, but at the same time, how to make you detached. But if you go to Krishna with material desires, he says that you're a fool because you're like somebody who's offered nectar, but they want to drink poison. But he says, because I'm very intelligent, I will force them to drink the nectar. I will take all their material desires away and I'll force them to drink nectar. So how he forces you, everybody goes through different experiences. Sometimes we suffer. Of course, grihastha life is also suffering. You have to take responsibility for your children. The whole idea is that, you start off, your wife is young and beautiful, you have your kids, gradually, you come older and your wife becomes older, and then the attraction goes away. And in the meantime, you got to work so hard to maintain your family, to send your children to college. It's an expensive business. So through all that anxiety of raising children, ultimately, you become detached. So, it's a scientific process. But you have to stick with your family. Like Prabhu said, no divorce. There's no such thing as divorce in Vedic culture. I know it's creeping in with westernized Indian people, but it's not acceptable in Vedic culture. So we have a very scientific process so that even the most attached people can ultimately become detached and either take sannyas or vanaprastha. Now, you might look at me and say, well, he's pretty old. Why isn't he a sannyasi? Well, it's a good question, but, I have a lot of cows, and I don't really have enough children who want to look after my cows. So the whole Vedic culture, Prabhupada wanted to establish Vrindavan villages. Vrindavan villages means that people live close to nature, they have cows, and back in the day, Indian women had a lot of children. You probably know. In fact, before the Industrial Revolution, most women had 6 or 7 children. And because that's kind of natural for a woman, back in the day at least. Nowadays, of course, because of the cost of living and everything else, women have to get jobs, you have to have a lot of money to survive nowadays. But the ideal society, which Prabhupada really wanted to reinvigorate, was that people live close to nature, they live simply, they have cows, and so in that kind of lifestyle, you have more children, and therefore the husband could leave his family because there was a lot of manpower in the family, because a lot of, you need a lot of children to maintain a farm to do the work. Nowadays we have tractors. In India, you see, everybody's got tractors. So the bull is, this is another class on self-sufficiency, which I really believe in, which I think, is something that devotees should be aware of and should think about it, because I don't think in the long run, without these farm communities, Iskcon can be truly successful, because we have to show people how you're supposed to live. And living in a city is just, it's okay. You have a nice temple, you have a beautiful temple, beautiful deities, but we also simultaneously need to have beautiful farm communities where we can actually show people cow protection and ox power and how to be healthy, because you grow your own food, you can get water from your well, you don't have to buy bottled water, you can grow your own fruit, and you see nature. I live in the country, like I said, I have a farm, but I also go to the city, but I like to see nature, because you see how beautiful nature is, how wonderful. Krishna's so clever, the way the different fruit trees, they blossom, and I have orange trees and lemon trees on my land. Have you ever smelled lemon blossom or orange blossom? You have? Anyway, it's very beautiful. So you see how nature is so well designed, and the lemon blossom, the orange blossom is so much superior. You travel somewhere, you go to an airport, an international airport, they have all these different perfumes and eau de cologne and like thousands of them, trying to smell nice, all packaged up, so much plastic and packaging. And you get the little lemon blossom, which smells so much better. So anyway, that's one way that society should be organized. Prabhupada, especially in the latter part of his life, when he was on his deathbed, in fact. And on their deathbed, people really only speak about the most important things in life. So he emphasized this varnashram. He said, without varnashram, people cannot be happy. So In fact, the last time I saw Srila Prabhupada was when he came to London in 1977. You probably know the story. But he was very, very sick. He was just basically couldn't move at all, I said the other day. And so he came to London because he wanted to establish the farm community. He actually was going to Gita Nagari in Pennsylvania to teach people how to live off the land. It was very important. He risked his health and his life just right before he died, just a couple of months before he passed away. He was willing to come to London. Tamar Krishna Maharaj was with him, I remember. He was there for his Vyasa Puja celebration. Srila Prabhupada was. Tamar Krishna Maharaj went through the history of his life. He got it right except for one date he got wrong. But Prabhupada didn't say anything. He never gave a lecture. He was simply sitting on the Vyasasan, and he was watching the kirtan, and he looked satisfied because he was happy to hear the kirtan. So when he was close to leaving his body, he always wanted to hear the kirtan, even if the singer wasn't a very good singer. I know some of the singers that sang when Prabhupada was dying, and they weren't melodic. They were terrible singers. But Prabhupada said, this is the medicine to hear the holy name. So we should drink the medicine, whether you live in the country or live in the city, or you're married or unmarried. The main thing is the chanting. And I was reading this book. It's a compilation of different experiences that other people had with Srila Prabhupada. A lot of them were his godbrothers or his godbrothers' disciples. It was compiled by a devotee called Mula Prakriti. She since passed away. She was a wonderful devotee. She was a book distributor. And he was saying, a lot of these people were saying how Prabhupada would chant a lot of japa. He would chant, they thought he was chanting 64 rounds a day. Of course, later on we didn't really see that so much because his main service was to translate the books. So, the japa is very important. So if we chant japa nicely and follow the program and come to Mangalatik as much as possible, come to class as much as possible, read the books, then undoubtedly, the end result will be that we'll become detached. We'll become detached from material life. We'll see the material world for what it really is. It's not a very nice place. It's very apparent nowadays, more than ever. But we can make it very nice. Like yesterday we went to the park, the zoo, and it was very wonderful. We were chanting and, people were happy to see us, and we met some nice people. So, the Harinam is still the most wonderful thing, that people hear the holy name. And, distributing books. I went out last week to distribute books. It used to be a thing where they would say, well, I'm burnt out with Sankirtan. But you don't have to get burnt out, because ultimately, it's a very satisfying service, and you're giving people a chance to change their lives. So, everybody should try to go with the Sankirtan party. Not many people came yesterday, unfortunately, but, if you can come, or if you can go out yourselves, independently of the Sankirtan, the monthly Sankirtan festival, and try to give people Krishna. That is the most satisfying thing. And I was listening to Shiva Maharaj is giving talk about book distribution. Now Shiva Ramaraj, I don't know how many of you know him or know of him, but he's a very special devotee. And in one of the preface to one of the books, I think it's Naparayam, he quotes Tamal Krishna Maharaj. And Tamal Krishna Maharaj said, I'm the one who should be writing these books. So I can show it to you if you don't believe me. So he's a special devotee, Shiva Ramaraj. So he was talking about book distribution, and he was saying that his big mistake, because actually, you know, Shiva Ramaraj has been the chairman of the GBC. He was on the GBC for 20 years or more. You know, he writes all these amazing books. If you've never read his books, you should read his books. They're incredible, beautiful illustrations. And he has this amazing farm project. And that's one reason I respect him so much, because practically speaking, him and Bhakti Raghava Maharaj are the only ones who've been able to establish farm communities. But anyway, he was saying that my big mistake was that I was distributing books in Canada, because he's actually Hungarian, Jewish Hungarian, but they, you know, the communists came there in 1956, and they were refugees, and they ended up in Canada, him and his family. And so he was in Canada, he was in Toronto or somewhere, and he was asked to become the president of another temple in Minnesota or somewhere. And he said, that was my big mistake, was that I gave up distributing books and I went to be the president of the temple. And then somehow or other he was in Chicago and he was distributing books, and then they asked him to be the president of the Chicago temple. And he said, my second big mistake was giving up book distribution and becoming the president of the Chicago temple. So, you know, we don't realize what nectar we're missing. If you don't distribute books, you should try it, because you get a very great reward from Lord Chaitanya. You get some ecstatic bliss, which is not hard to find anywhere else. So anyway, so I finished there. Any questions? Reflections? Okay, yes?
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Thank you very much. Wonderful class, Prabhu. So you spoke about many things. I just wanted to ask, so one of the things you talked about is husband and wife.
Is what?
Husband and wife.
Yeah.
Together, you know, strictly become a strict devotees and raise children very nicely.
Yeah.
And could you elaborate more on what is the role of wife, what is the role of a husband in raising the children?
Well, generally, you know, Prabhupada would say that the man is like the spiritual head of the family, and it's not necessarily a fact. Sometimes it's not. But, you know, the man, his role is to be the breadwinner, to make the money. Because nowadays, you know, because of the economics of the modern world, life's so expensive, a lot of times women work as well to supplement the income. But, you know, we should live simply. And really, I think it's better if the women, they spend time with their children, they don't work, because otherwise, you know, you have to put them in a daycare or something. And, you know, so that, and also cooking is a very important, you know, Prabhupada emphasized that, you know, women should, I mean, I don't know if they like to hear it, but he said, the woman's role is cooking and cleaning. So, of course, I know they can do a lot of things. They, you know, But that's what Prabhupada says. So cooking is a very important thing. But they don't teach cooking anymore. Because eating is such a very, essential part of our life, to eat, right? We have to eat. So if we eat food which is satisfying and cooked nicely, then it's much easier to be healthy and to be satisfied, because prasadam is such an important item. So the man, Shishi Radhanila Madhava ki jai, Shigiri Govardhan ki jai, Gauranitai ki jai. So, I guess I'm old-fashioned or something. My wife has never worked. She makes butter, believe it or not. My wife's quite a special person. She milks the cows, she makes butter, she dresses the deities, but she's always cooked every day. And she doesn't complain, she's happy. So I think that, the traditional role of the husband and the wife is that the husband would be the breadwinner, he would do the work, and the wife would stay home and look after the kids. Of course, they did have a lot more kids, like I said, back in the day. And Amala Mataji, Amala, she's a super brainiac lady, devotee. She said that the Industrial Revolution specifically impacted the women, because as previously they used to have so many children, and that was their role in society. And since then, because of the cost of living and the changing roles, and things have changed. But that was the role, women had more children, and so they had to spend more time at home. I know a lot of Gujarati families. How many here are Gujarati? So your grandparents, I'm sure they had a lot of children. Yes, 7 or 8, 10, 12 children. It's just normal, Indian families. But the modern industrial revolution now, has really impacted Indian family life, that so many farmers have committed suicide because of the introduction of modern farming techniques. 300,000 farmers have killed themselves. And the bull has been put out of work because we got the tractor. So now India, exports a lot of beef, which is amazing because India is supposed to be the home of Dharma. The bull represents Dharma. So, it's very sad. But fortunately, Srila Prabhupada did revive Indian culture, and hopefully, I got an email from somebody yesterday actually, Braja Bihari Prabhu. Anyone know Braja Bihari? He's a very wonderful devotee. He was saying there's a devotee in Mumbai who has 1,500 Japa students, and he wants to start a self-sufficient farm near Mumbai, and he wants to talk to me because I know a little bit about it. I don't know that much, but I know a little bit. I've been to Hungary many times. If you ever get a chance to travel, go to New Brajadam in Hungary. This is the most beautiful city temple I've seen, at least in the West. But the farm community in Hungary is so wonderful. And Tamar Krishna Maharaj used to love it there too. Is that okay? Hare Krishna. Anything else? Okay. Srila Prabhupada ki jai. Srimad Bhagavatam ki jai.